All right, Brooke. Good morning. How's it going?
Conrad, what's shaking? How are you?
Good. We're, we always do remote recordings, but this one's very remote. I think this will be our furthest distance guest so far. So happy to have Steve with us here today. But Brooke, how did you originally meet Steve? Because I can't imagine it was in person, although maybe it was.
Yeah, so Steve was our first partner in Europe. So Steve down in UK and came up and signed up with Vintory and was a partner. And then he actually did come over to the US. I think one of the VRMAs, and we finally got to meet in person. So it was really good to see him. But it's great to have him on the podcast this week.
Awesome. Well, Steve, welcome. Appreciate you joining us. I know obviously different time zones, all that kind of stuff. It's always good to connect. So for the listener who might not know you, would love a little background about you, your company, My Getaways, what you're focused on today from a holiday let perspective. Maybe we should use the proper terminology.
Well, we can call it anything, from vacation rentals to holiday lets to short-term rentals. Hey, it's all exactly the same stuff, right? So I own a business on the south coast of England called My Getaways. In a city called Brighton and Hove, which is a fantastic place by the coast if you've not been to the UK before. We hosted 25,000 guests last year. We're the biggest operator in our location. We built a lot of our own technology, our own software, including our own PMS, guest apps, and so on and so forth. We did that really early on, 9 or 10 years ago, when really software was for our sector was in its infancy. So I didn't see anybody out there that could really do what I wanted it to do. So I made it myself. So I started on a project, thought, this will take me 6 months. I'll build this property management system and it'll do everything I need it to do. Well, here we are 10 years later and X hundreds of thousands of pounds down the road. We're still building it, but it does run our business for us. So, so we kind of cracked part of the nut. So that's us.
Right on. Awesome. Well, yeah, Steve, like I said, I suspect some people listening haven't heard of you or haven't been to the UK, our very US-centric audience, so it's good to get some context there. Well, I'll dive right in the interest of time, and we'll get going on the top 10 mistakes. Obviously, Steve, you're here because you contributed to the book, so we'll love to kind of run through these and kind of talk about the high level of what you learned from each of these. So number one, not establishing rules for growth and becoming a crisis manager. So what's been your rules for growth that you've implemented today in the business, and how are you hopefully no longer a crisis manager in the business?
Well, look, I'm not a crisis manager so much. In our sector, I think there's always a crisis around the corner waiting to jump at you. But what I do strategically these days is do business plans and plan for my next 3 years. Because I think there's a saying: if you don't make a plan, you're planning to fail. You really are going to walk into a brick wall very soon, especially when you're trying to grow really quickly, by not having enough staff, not enough staff placed. Not having enough vehicles to be able to manage laundry, by not having enough cleaning teams in place. And I think we kind of went through a process of doing exactly that, just growing, chucking on more inventory. And actually what happens is your service standards start to do that. Your owners start to complain. Your cleaners are overworked. Your team are overworked. They start leaving and you leave yourself in a real bad position. So I always give myself a 3-year plan now, an actual written document that I present to my team personally every year. At the beginning of every year, we get to January and I say, right, guys, here's where we are on our pathway. Here's what we achieved last year. Here's what we said we were going to achieve. And here's what we're planning to achieve for the next 3 years. And so you kind of, the team have a full 360 of where it's going, what the opportunities may be for them. And more importantly, how you're going to manage that growth going forward. Have you got the systems in place, the software in place, the hardware in place, the vans in place, the vehicles, the space to be able to accommodate this growth? I learned that I learned that lesson the hard way, and obviously that's what we do now.
I love that. It's, I feel like most professional vacation rental managers are very reactive. They're always hiring too late, right? They're always hiring 3 months too late, so it becomes a panic, and then they're always buying the vehicles and things like that. So to have that proactive approach.
Yeah, well, I was losing hair over it. It was kind of, this is not working for me. We need to find a way where I can sleep at night. And I think if you do a business plan just for yourself, this is internal. This is not for a bank. This is not for an investor. This is for you to say where your journey is going to go. Because I can pretty much guarantee you ask nearly every property manager where you're going to be in a year's time, and the vast majority will have an end goal, but they won't have the steps that's going to get them there. And I put that in there every 3 months as a milestone. If we're going to achieve that, then we need to have X.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I've shared this before on this podcast that we would always build our businesses with pro formas, and we'd always project. And I could pretty quickly I could narrow exactly, and it all filtered down exactly, and it all started with number of properties at the top, and then you could tell exactly where we're going to do in revenue, but then you could also tell how to staff up from that point too. So we had this, and build the business model first in a pro forma, and you can kind of project when you need to start doing those hirings and everything else. And you can have your ratios of like, what's the ideal number of employees per properties, and, scale it at that point. So, and I also love that you not only, set the goals, almost everyone sets goals, but it's also the accountability part of it. Like at the end of every quarter, at the end of every year, are you being held accountable? Are you holding your teams accountable to hitting those goals? And where did you miss? And kind of doing a post-mortem analysis, really determine, where you did miss and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah. I think be critical in yourself as well. It's not all glamour. I think be critical in yourself on what you haven't achieved, as well as what you have achieved. But what you haven't achieved, you might be able to fill in some of the blanks in your knowledge as well.
I always feel like, too, personally, my experience, Steve, is that writing it down is such an excellent clarity moment for me to like, you might have an idea in your head loosely, but when you actually spend the time to like write it down, whether physically, like on the notebook, I've been doing more of that lately actually, or like even in a document, it makes you clarify. It makes you, put it into a few words. And sometimes that helps you get closer to where you're trying to go because you have to define it exactly, which I think can be clarifying for sure.
Well, not to give one more plug, that last thing we need to do is give one more plug for EOS, but EOS forces you to do that, Entrepreneur Operating System, right? It forces you to do the annual goals, your quarterly rocks. You do it by department, you do it by, for the company, you do it by department, you do per person. So everybody has those, annual and quarterly goals, and you have to be held accountable to them, and you see what you do, and we judge, and, our goal is to hit 80% of our rocks. And if you're hitting 100% of your rocks, which are really just goals, then you're not setting, stretch goals enough. You're not really pushing yourself enough. So 80% is kind of the target we're shooting for.
If there's any help, I've never achieved any of my targets exactly as I expected to. So quite clearly, I'm in the other camp. But I reach for the sky.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, let's go to number 2. You actually alluded to this earlier in the intro, Steve, talking about building your own tech. So number 2 was getting excited about new tech without thinking about the real use and cost. Only invest in technology if it saves you money and improves your business operations. So what's the current thinking that you have today with regards to tech?
It's exactly that still. I mean, I have to fight myself. I love tech. I just don't have to look at the real use case scenario for it. That's what I've done in the past. Nowadays, I do. I look at, two things I look at, two key points. Is it gonna improve our operational excellence, or is it going to make us more money? If I can't answer yes to either one of those, I don't touch it. It's as simple as that. And that's not my team. It's me that brings on the software. So it's me telling myself that, all right, does it do one of them two things? If it doesn't, keep away from it. You don't need it. Doesn't matter how shiny that bit of gold is and how good it is. Does it do anything for you and your business? The answer is no. Then don't touch it.
Nice. I like it. Plain and simple. A lot of people do fall in the trap, though, of thinking that they can build something better. And think about it. Many of these software companies have a lot of resources, and they've got dozens and dozens of developers, and developers are not cheap, and they're continually improving that product. And if you really take the true cost of that, is it really worth it to build it? And I've known a couple companies, I won't name names, but I've known a couple companies out there that have attempted to build their complete own software platform. And after hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, they've realized they made the wrong choice, to build that out. It's challenging enough when you have a dedicated team. That's all you do, let alone, so hats off to anyone that is able to do it.
Well, look, add the other layer that's brand new newish for all of us now, that wasn't there even for 3 years ago. You add that extra layer of AI now, which is about to turbocharge the whole world. And you have to sit there and say, do I really want to invest in that? Or are there a lot better players out there than me that can do that? And actually, that's a question I'm asking of myself, and I will be over the next 12 months. Do I really want to invest in that, or do I want to buy that software in? I haven't got the answer to that yet, but it's quite likely somebody else is going to be far better at it than we are. We're generalists. So it's another area to discuss at some stage in the future, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. our mutual friend Brooke David Angotti, I think, has referenced 100 developers at Guesty, if not more than that, 100 developers. So to claim that you're going to build what Guesty's built, for example, well, they've got 100 people. What do you have? Probably not
Yeah.
100 people as far as budget goes, needless to say.
And a couple $100 million in venture capital behind them.
Of course.
That helps.
Yeah.
That helps.
And not an operational business to operate.
Right. Yeah,
right.
exactly.
They're just doing that. Yeah, they're just doing that. Nothing else. Yeah. Awesome. Well, a bit of a different direction here for number 3 then, Steve, in your list. Number 3, not keeping taxes in mind, structuring your business according to minimize exposure. I'm not at all familiar with UK tax stuff, but certainly a lot of tax and finance things impacts the US market as well. What's kind of your current, tax strategy to make sure you have the right finances in place?
Well, in the UK, we have there's a scheme called a margin scheme. I won't go into detail on it because obviously your audience would probably get bored of it and they could spend hours on it. But effectively, what it means is that you pay your local VAT, so your tax on the margin, not on the turnover. What a lot of businesses, including my own in the very early days, didn't account for that at all. Didn't even consider it as a consideration. Actually, what we were really busy on is driving revenue and turnover, not thinking about how that's going to look after tax. And I know that I ran along with that for 2 or 3 years, not making a lot of profit, and saying, maybe 4 years actually, and saying, how is that? How can that be possibly? You'll turn over X, and actually at the bottom of it, you're getting a salary out of it and not much more. It didn't make any sense to me until I found actually that we need to restructure the way we looked at tax and the structure of our business. So really important to have, especially in our business where there's lots of moving parts, there's lots of components to property management. So, just make sure you've got a really good tax accountant, in your corner explaining the stuff that you don't understand and picking up the stuff that you're never going to understand and making sure that you end up being profitable, because it isn't about your turnover, it's about what you make at the bottom line at the end of it.
That's right. And you can't hide from the tax man, right?
Two things in certain. Richard Vorton is a big European player over here, and Richard Vorton always says, there's 2 things you can't hide from. That's death and taxes. That's very true.
I think that's true for everybody on planet Earth, no matter where you are.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, number 4 then, a bit of a different direction here again then, Steve. Number 4, trusting OTA data over market data. OTAs are always going to prioritize their own profits. So how do you use the OTA data? Maybe take some of it into account, none of it into account. How do you approach that today?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I take OTA data with a pinch of salt. Not because the OTAs are bad people. It's just that every single OTA you talk to will have a different view on exactly the same number of properties or the same amount of data. They'll look at it in a different way. But what they always look in it is the way that suits their agenda rather than yours. They're a business. They're there to make money, just like you are. And they will look at the data in a completely different mindset than somebody looking after your business. So I would always take OTA data with a pinch of salt. I look at market data and a much wider scope of data, but more importantly, I look at my own data. I know that internally I can look at my own data and look what's happened in the past to give me a good steer on what's likely to happen in the future. When you add another layer of that, including big events and concerts going on, and new shows coming to town, or new building sites going up, or new buildings being built, you're going to get a fairly good measure of what's going on. The third metric on that for me is how many properties are coming into the market. So, where were you in comparison to last year? So if you've got 10% more properties in the market than you did a year ago, has guest demand kept up? Quite likely it's not the case. So you're going to be looking at putting some pressure on your ADR. So I take a very 360 view of it, and I certainly, not because I don't trust OTAs per se, I don't trust the data that I get out of one OTA. If I put them all together, I'm probably going to get a clearer picture.
Steve, what kind of tools or software are you using for that market data?
We use in Europe, we use Price Labs, but we also look at our own database very closely. Our own data is more important than any external data because we are in a micro market. We're in a market that we are the biggest player in our market. We've got 10 years worth of historic data. So I trust our data above and beyond anything else anybody else will tell me. I also know when the key events are coming up. We have a key event calendar. So we know, we live in the city we work in. We live in the city we operate in. So we know when stuff is happening. If a hotel burns down, which happened last year, we know that's going to put slightly more demand on, for instance, our sector and the other hotel sectors. If it happens in peak summer, that's going to put a little bit more demand on. There isn't an algorithm or a bit of software that can tell you that without actually being on the ground.
Right. Are you using any kind of BI tool for to kind of interpret your data, or are you literally just looking at spreadsheets?
No, it's a bit more. It's a bit cleverer than spreadsheets. Thankfully, we do put it on spreadsheets, but we've obviously built some tools within our own property management system, which we self-built, that gives us a lot of reporting functionality and interprets the data for us and allows us to look at it side by side, year on year, month by month, week on week, and so on and so forth. And we look at obviously all the usual key drivers. We look at average daily rate, we look at occupancy, we look at bookings versus last month and last year, and these are the things we look at all the time. We're looking for changes in what's happening within our own data, much more so than we look for external data. Although we do use Price Labs to give us a steer on what they believe the market is doing.
Yeah, I know in the US we have these different tools, Steve, where people kind of collaborate and combine data together, but it sounds like that may not be as popular over there. So having your own data and being the biggest player certainly helps, I imagine, significantly in that conversation.
Yeah, I suppose if we went into new markets, we're going to have to use data like AirDNA, and we're going to really have to rely on their tools to be able to tell us, what's going on. But in our local area, we know what a property is going to achieve. We've got a very good idea because we've got historic data that tells us that. So
exactly,
we're very fortunate.
I like that. And it's accurate, which is a valuable tool for sure. Number 5, then we'll kind of skip over to the kind of guest marketing side a little bit on the OTA side of things. Number 5, review your listing from your own perspective, not from your guest expectations. I'm curious on this one. Could you explain maybe the difference between those two things?
Yes. So when I talk about our own perspective, I look at it and say it's not the guest expectations are one thing, but a lot of stuff will come into play with the guests going on a trip. Are they in a good mood when they get there? Have they found what they expected? Have they had a good time with their children, or their children drove them mad on the journey there? You can only do so much to manage a guest expectation, but what you can do is you can make sure that you walk that journey to that property, and you make sure that the entry point is correct. You make sure that the stairs are described correctly. You make sure that lighting in the communal hallways is working, or they're where expected to be, rather than just relying on a photographer to be sent out to take the photos for you and do 360 tours. Actually, you need to send one of your senior team into the property and go and walk it, and preferably go and stay there for a night before you launch it live, to make sure everything works as it should do if you were staying there yourself. So that's what we do on every property. We road test it.
When we would build purpose-built vacation homes down in Orlando, we would actually do that. We would spend a couple nights in the property right before. It's almost kind of like a soft launch of a restaurant. And it was amazing the little things that you would find that you'd only find by staying in the property. Sometimes it's the simple little things like the cable didn't connect in one bedroom, or something like that, or the dishwasher, wasn't working properly. But you don't find those things unless you're actually staying in the property. So I love that idea of actually doing those little tests.
Let me give you, for instance, on one of our findings. We were just before we came on air, me and my team were having a conversation about, will the hot water tank, the electric hot water tank, be big enough for the occupancy we're expecting to put in the property? Now, if you'd asked me that question 3 years ago, we wouldn't have even asked that question of ourselves. We ask it now because we've learned over years of experience and road testing these properties ourselves that actually these tanks are not going to be big enough for the capacity the property can physically hold. So we're now going back to the owner of the property and saying, can you put in electric showers for us rather than water tank? It's simple things like that without doing that walking through and staying in the property and understanding the moving parts that can affect your guests before they get there. You're never going to have that answer.
Conrad, do you know what an electric shower is? Like that is that where you plug in? That sounds like a death trap to me.
Yeah, I think that's when the toaster falls in the bath. I think there's a movie about that. No, I was thinking though, Steve, that it's like the property wasn't necessarily made for that, so you're kind of accommodating it a little bit differently. They didn't expect X number of guests to go there. But I was going to say, here's a fun marketing one for you. Market it like, hey, it's healthy to take these cold showers and cold plunges. That's all the rage, at least with all these health influencers. So you got to be like, no, we're actually trying to help your actually recovery and things like that. So
hey, let me make a note of that. I think that's going to work. I'm afraid.
No, it's not going to work. That's not going to work at all.
Let's try.
Yeah. But no, it's those little details, going back to your core point there, Steve, that do matter quite a bit, right? And the guest notices this, and does it automatically make them from a 5-star to 1-star? No, but like they might mention it in the review. Like it's going to erode down that guest experience a little bit. And my kind of take on this is that when the guest arrives, as long as you meet their expectation, you're kind of like right in the middle. Anything that goes wrong, though, it's like you're kind of edging in that bad territory. Anything that goes right, you're kind of gaining some on them. So things like that, I think, do matter quite a bit. Jokes
You have
aside,
two or three
because
of them things that go wrong though, and you haven't checked them. They're easy to solve.
yeah,
I mean, it's heartbreaking. You see that come on the review, and you think, "How the hell did we miss that? That was an easy
right,
fix, right?"
yep, small things add
So
up.
that's why we do it. Yeah.
Yep. Small things add up for sure. All right, going a little bit of a different direction here again. Sorry, with number 6, not making your HR watertight and ensuring your teams understand what's expected of them. So, walk me through kind of your HR team training and building processes today.
Yeah, it's not really the HR team training. It's actually learning from the mistakes that you've made in the past. And we've made several mistakes where the expectations of the role haven't been clearly defined when the person's joined the company. So, of course, roles change in every business. The businesses grow. They're going to move in different directions. But what we do is we do a very simple task list of what we expect people to achieve each day. Especially the more junior staff that are learning the business, that haven't come with a pre understanding of what our sector does. We actually do them a simple task list of, look, these are the things you expected to achieve each day. You expect to achieve these as a minimum, and that keeps us in the right path. And it's actually helped us to hold staff to account when things haven't gone quite right in performance reviews. 3-4 months down the road, where actually their expectations of the job description and your expectations are two very different things. And that's because we've got the experience of this sector. They don't generally when they join us. Short-term rentals or vacation rental sector. Actually, we bring people from all over the spectrum of hospitality into what we do. We're a pretty niche sector, aren't we? So, it's quite important to lay out some of them expectations so they understand what's expected of them to achieve each day. And that's what we do. And again, that's learn from the hard yards, unfortunately, where we've made their mistakes, got it wrong, lost staff, or staff have been really unhappy by the way we've have to handle them, because actually we haven't really laid out what was expected of them, and then come back to them every 3 months and check it. We haven't done that. So I don't think you get it right all of the time, but it really has helped everybody in the team understand what's expected of them. So that's where.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Sue Jones is out there listening, loving you say this. So
Yeah.
she's an HR consultant here in the short-term rental industry. Does a great job. So.
Yeah. Well, there's honestly, there are some really good HR consultants out there. And property owners generally, property managers generally, especially the ones that set the businesses up, aren't generally very good at working on their own, but not so good at making sure the contracts for HR are correct, making sure that you've covered all the legal bases on what they should and shouldn't have in them. I think every property management business I've ever known has generally started with 1 or 2 friends getting together, getting some properties together. All of a sudden, you've got 6 staff, and they're still your friends and family. And then you've got 20 staff, and they're not your friends and family anymore. And they have expectations of you as an employer as well. So it's very important to get that part of it right.
Mm. Yeah. I'm actually reading this book right now called Output Thinking. For the listener, I'll put a link in the show notes so people can check it out. And everything you were just saying there, Steve, is actually exactly what they talk about in that book, as far as defining what people actually need to be, outputting basically each day or each week, each month. And I'm bad at this too. I think I need to work on it, right? Like, yeah, do this task in the company, but then it like expands so far over time to like, yeah, then you got to do this, and you have to do this, then you have to do this. But we never go back and write it down. So this book is making me think about those processes. So that's a good one. I'll put a link in the show notes to Output Thinking. The author is John Seifer, just for people to check out.
I'll bear that in mind. I mean, is it Google Scribe at the moment, which it's revolutionized my life, where actually, your processes, it'll take screenshots of your processes as you go through. It's a really cheap tool. I think it's $10 a month or something. Really worth having a look at. It makes my life so much easier. Someone that doesn't like to write actually writes it for me.
Right. I like that. All right. Number 7, Brooke, this one came up quite a bit. So Steve, curious your perspective on it. Not seeking out advice from mentors and professional networks. That this has to be one of the most common ones that comes up. What's kind of your experience reaching out eventually to these networks, and what benefits have you got from doing that?
I think I've said this once or twice already, because this is the top 10 mistakes, by the way. So I think I've already said this a few times. It helped me sleep at night, actually. On stuff I didn't have the answers to, it gave me shortcuts to the answers. I've got a couple of great mentors, we call them non-executive directors over here, but that have really helped me find a pathway through some of the stuff that I knew that was right or wrong, and they're not giving me the right answer. They're not telling me what I want to hear. They're telling me the right answer. Sometimes they're two very different things, right? But they really are sounding boards, and I would say really early on in anybody's journey in this sector or any business is to try and get yourself some mentors on board as quickly as you can, that are people that you can talk to outside of your day-to-day operation, that will give you the right answers as far as they're concerned, not the answers you want to hear, and that will help you on the path.
That's, Conrad alluded to this before, Steve, but this was mentioned 22 times out of the top 10 mistakes. So it just talks about how really important it is. But you said something really important there, Steve. It's like, you don't just want the yes men or the yes people. You want people that actually will push back. You want people that are going to challenge you. And those are the true ones that are not just going to agree with every single thing you say, because you need that honest, feedback sometimes.
Yeah, you really do. Yeah.
Yeah, right on. Number 8, kind of more about, yourself, your role in the company, not knowing your value and paying yourself accordingly. So what's your kind of approach here? I think you alluded to it earlier. When you're starting out, you've got nothing, but as the business has grown, imagine more is coming in. How do you decide what's kind of the appropriate compensation for your time?
I think I said on there, I didn't actually. That was the point. I was paying myself the same on year 3 as I was in year 8. And suddenly looked up and go, actually, I've got quite a sizable business here. And the taxman's getting their share. The taxman, there we go again with the taxman. The taxman's getting their share, and we're buying more vans, and we're looking after the staff. And actually, I wasn't looking after myself at all. I didn't think I was looking after myself at all. And at that time, you have to evaluate and say, actually, what would your market value be for your role in our sector? And if you're not paying yourself that market role, first of all, either you've got to look to there's a future and that's where it's going to be, or above that, or you might as well go and get a job and sleep at night. If you're not paying yourself market sector rate, you're in the wrong business. So you have to value yourself. You have to have the margins to do it, or your margins aren't good enough, and maybe it's time to look at doing something else, because I think there's something in there that you have to value yourself. I mean, you spend 9 or 10 years, as I have, building a pretty successful business, and I then all of a sudden don't value myself, or in my case as well, my partner, who was also working in the business and paying us well under market rate. Actually, my partner was under minimum wage, because we just hadn't looked. I hadn't looked. I'd looked at everybody else and looked at the business and looked at the growth, and I hadn't sat back and thought, actually, how are we going to reward ourselves for this beyond? I'm talking beyond dividends here. I'm talking in terms of salary. And if you're not paying yourself accordingly, you're not valuing yourself accordingly, and you won't feel good about it either. Those headaches at 11 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning don't feel quite so hard when you are rewarding yourself, to the value you are at market rate.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the Profits First book, right? At least start by paying yourself first. But you'd be surprised, Steve. You are not alone. Many, many, many entrepreneurs, not only obviously in the vacation rental sector, but in any industry, do this. They really pay themselves well below what market rate would be. It reminds me, one of my mentors, told me in the early days when I started my first company right out of college. He said, "Brooke, you know what the definition of an entrepreneur is?" He's like, "You get paid last."
Very true. Very true. Because you're rewarding yourself the pay rises.
Yeah. I like that. Well, number 9 then kind of relates to that one a little bit more on the approach side of things, like how we're talking to clients, homeowners, et cetera. So number 9, not showcasing your own skills and value to clients for fear of looking stupid. So is it a confidence thing kind of from your perspective, Steve, or is there more to it than that with how you present your skills to, I'm assuming, homeowners in this situation?
It's actually believing in yourself and believing in your product. And actually, I don't know, especially in the early days of any journey in a business, I don't know many entrepreneurs that actually fully believe that what they're saying is actually true. Even if it is true, even if the facts say that it's actually true, it's almost like, how did this actually happen? I think you have to get a bit further on the journey before you actually believe in yourself. And then you need to go and tell people about it, not just potential customers, but by talking at conferences and sharing your knowledge, because, without sharing that knowledge, you're on your own. So, and by sharing knowledge again at a conference is another hurdle, because you've got then to get over the fear of standing on stage and not looking like an idiot. I'm sure Brooke's done that in the past. That feeling, that almost stage fright. It's not quite stage fright because you know what you're going to talk about, but it kind of is, because if you now believe in yourself, and now you want others to believe in yourself in your sector, and there is an element of, am I really? Do I really know what I'm talking about here? And I think that first couple of times when you do talk in public at a conference of some kind, and you're rewarded by people saying, yeah, that was really good, that was really interesting, and they talk about a point. I think that finally gives you the full 360 circle to say, okay, we actually do know what we're talking about here. We are doing the right thing, and we're going on the right journey, regardless of finances.
Yeah. No, I do remember you spot on, Steve. I remember the first time presenting in front of a big audience and looking out in the crowd and seeing these people that I really respected and I really admired, and some of the people I looked up to, and then here I'm like teaching them, and I feel like a little bit of imposter syndrome, talking about what I do, and when these guys are and girls are much more successful than I was. So it takes a couple times, and knowing though there's other people in the audience that have just getting started in their journey, or maybe they're just a little bit along, and coming up to you afterwards and we're thanking you for that presentation. So you got to think about it, I guess, in whole. And look, even sometimes these pros, these people have been in the industry for years and years and years. As long as they walk away with one little takeaway, one actionable hint that they got from you. And look, I've never been to a presentation, I've never been to a conference where I didn't learn something, even from sometimes the most junior people. And that sometimes that's where those best lessons do come from.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that, and that then goes 360 back to when you're speaking to your customers. You really do believe what you're saying because it's true. You've had it then verified, and you've kind of double verified it. But you're right, imposter syndrome. I think every entrepreneur in the world, I think that creeps up on their shoulder and sits on their shoulder, telling them they are an imposter. Thankfully, you've got the other shoulder that carries the good guy and says, "Come on, you're doing the right thing here. You're okay."
I remember one of my early pitch meetings, Brooke, was up in the Outer Banks, Scott Leggett, when he was at Seaside Vacations. And we just sat there and listened. And I was like, how are we pitching this guy marketing right now? Like, he knows email and segmentation and things like that better than anybody. And then I remember it was like years later, it was like a VRMA 2 years ago. He was in my session. And I was like, like that was, that was a cool moment for me. I was like, maybe I could teach him something, even though, of course, way back when I was just sitting there, not talking and listening and being like, oh, really? Oh, really? Oh, really? Like writing it all down. And I was like, oh, yeah, well, I guess we're supposed to pitch you at this point. But it was very different. He was in a different role at that time. But that was my moment, of what you're describing there, Brooke, for sure.
Yeah, I think we all have it. Full circle. Exactly. Yeah, the 360 for sure. It's lovely to experience. It really is.
Yeah, and a great person who never, who knows a lot, but never, would say that. He just teaches and he just talks about what he knows, which I think is sometimes the best people to learn from as well. Sure. Well, number 10, Steve, we're going pretty quickly here, but we're rounding out, and I think we've done a good job of covering everything so far. I know we got a few more questions that Brooke's going to hit you with before we let you go, though. So number 10, offering a cheap service rather than a good value service, and not fully understanding your competitor's offering to improve your own sales pitch. So how do you kind of think about competition? How do you know what you're offering is good value for money, and how do you approach this today?
Well, look, I mean, I think within everything I've said there, we had a tendency of selling ourselves far too cheaply. We had a tendency of undervaluing the service we did. And it was only when we did a very comprehensive competitor analysis that we realized, first of all, our rates weren't quite high enough. But secondly, the services we were offering within that rate, none of our competitors were. So I guess it was about, for me, it was about saying, okay, well, let's make sure that this service, this is some time ago, but make sure that the service we're offering is good value for money for the customer. But secondly, on top of that, these value add services you're adding on, they should be chargeable. They shouldn't be included as an addition. I mean, the maintenance, for instance, we very early on were including quite a high level of maintenance within our management contracts. And you can have a service level that would include that. And I think quite a lot of people do. But actually, we were coming in at a basic level and saying, oh, yeah, by the way, we're going to do quite a bit of maintenance for you free of charge too. The customer didn't value that maintenance as much as we did. And therefore, to them, it wasn't that big a deal because they never saw what we did for them. We put a trail on the back end of our landlord's portal now where they can see everything that we do for them. So anything we do for free, they see it. We change a light bulb. They wouldn't know about that in the past. They absolutely know the value of our services that bring. So I suppose the important bit is, is make sure you offer a good value service to the customer, but don't be cheap. Don't be cheap because you won't be valued if you're super cheap. They'll go to your other service provider, which is 5% more expensive than you, offering less for their money because they believe there's some sort of catch, and you're not offering that service. That's what will happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. Awesome, Brooke. Well, I think you got one more question you're going to fire Steve's way before we let him go for today. So, Brooke.
Yeah, well, Steve, first, thanks for coming on. Thanks for being a friend, and thanks for being a partner. But if you could go back in time, go back to your 25-year-old self and give a little bit of advice, what would it be?
Save your money. Don't spend it. Save your money and start putting it to something useful. Don't have that extra coffee at the end of the day or that extra beer at the end of the night. Try and be a little bit more sensible with your money. Because if I had done that, I would have been in a much bigger position than I am now. Although we're doing okay, I've had to restart my life, if you like, in my sort of late 30s rather than my mid 20s. So that would be my absolute one. Try and put the pennies away where you can. Don't be too free and easy with your money, because you'll never know when you're going to need that money to actually build something with it.
Right on. Awesome. Yeah. Well, that was excellent, Steve. Thanks for being our first over the pond guest. We do appreciate that. And I think the listener will get some benefit from it. Excellent accent as well, which is always good to bring into a podcast. People can hear the different voices very clearly. We'll put a link in the show notes to not only Steve's LinkedIn, we'll always link that up. We'll also link to mygetaways.co.uk. So if you're ever in Brighton, of course, you've got to stay with Steve and his properties down there next time you find yourself in that neck of the woods. So we thank you for your time and attention today listening. If you got some value out of today's episode, we super appreciate reviews. So if you go to your podcast app of choice, Spotify, iTunes is where we get the most download. Leave us 5 stars and we can get more awesome guests like Steve on in the future. Thanks so much, and we'll catch everyone next time.